Hello, my friends and fellow MonoGame developers. My name is Chris Whitley, also known as Turtle Dev or just Turtle in the MonoGame community, as Lupin would like me to point out. And today in this video, I'd like to answer another question that's been asked on the MonoGame subreddit. So specifically, let's go over to it real quick. And the user elafito, I hope I'm saying that correctly, asks, is it possible to make Nez work on VSCode? I've tried a few things, but I'm unable to make it work, and I'd rather not use Visual Studio. Well, elafito, I'm here to let you know that yes, it is possible to make Nez work on VSCode. So let's step through that process of setting it up to work in VSCode so that you can get going and start working on your game with Nez. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to open VSCode. Obviously, that's what we're using, right? We're going to File, Open Folder, and I'm just going to go to my MonoGame Dev folder, and I'm going to create a new folder in here called Nez Example. Let's open that folder up. So the first thing we're going to need to do is actually just create, like you normally would, a MonoGame project. So we're going to do a MonoGame desktop GL project. So I'm going to open up my terminal with, for me, my command keyboard shortcut is Control-Shift-tilde. Yours might be different. You can also click on View at the top and go to Terminal here. And in here, because we're using VS Code, you're going to need to be familiar with the .NET CLI commands. So hopefully you're familiar with those. But the first thing we're going to do is create a new solution file. So .NET new SLN for solution, and we're going to name it Nez Example. After we've created the solution file, we're going to create a new MonoGame Desktop GL project, which is going to be .NET new MG Desktop GL, and we're going to name it Nez Example as well. All right, project has been created. And now we need to add the project to our solution file. So .NET SLN add, and we're going to give it the path to that Nez example project folder. And now our project has been added to the solution. So from here, if we go into our Nez example folder and we just do a .NET run, you'll see this is going to run just a normal MonoGame desktop GL project window. It's going to open up with the good old cornflower blue. There we go. So at this point, we have a standard MonoGame project going, but now we need to incorporate Nez into this. To do that, Nez is not distributed but via NuGet packages, like some other third-party frameworks like MonoGame Extended. Instead, Nez, you have to reference the source code directly. So to do that, we're going to go over to the Nez GitHub repo, which I'll include the link to the GitHub repo in the description of the video below. So from here, we're going to click on code, and we're going to copy the Git URL here so that we can clone this repository down. Back inside of VS Code, I'm going to, since we CD'd into the project folder, I'm going to CD out one back into our base root folder. And then from here, we're going to git clone and give it that Git URL for Nez, and it clones Nez down for us. So here we go. Now we have the whole Nez source code. Inside of here, inside the Nez source code, there is a Nez portable folder. And inside Nez portable, there's nez.mg38 csproj. So this is specifically the one we're going to need to use for MonoGame. If you're using FNA, you'll use the FNA csproj, but since we're using MonoGame, we're using the Nez mg38 csproj. So that's the one we're going to need to reference in our own project. So once again, in the terminal, let's cd into our Nez example project. And now we need to add the reference to that csproj. So .NET add reference, and it's we need to go back one folder, and then it's nez.portable, and then it is nez.mg38.csproj. Could not find .NET add reference nez /nez portable. Oh, it's because I was doing backslashes and not forward slashes. That's my bad. Nez portable, nez.mg38 csproj. And there we go. Reference added to the project. If we look inside of our project now, go to our csproj, we can see right here, Nez has now been added as a reference to our project. Fantastic. So if we run our project now, .NET run, we'll see that we get the standard cornflower blue window. Give it a second because it's building the Nez stuff too. But we get our cornflower blue window. But this is still just MonoGame. This is just MonoGame desktop.jl. This still isn't using Nez. We need to set our game up now in code to actually use Nez instead of the base MonoGame systems, right? So let's close this out. Let's open our game1 folder or game1 file. And you might get this notification about your workspace has multiple Visual Studio solution files. That's because Nez itself has solution files inside of it. If you get that, you can choose to open, and you're going to want to choose your Nez example solution, not the solutions inside the Nez folder. Just choose the Nez example one. If you don't get that, but you would like to open the solution manually, you can do it from the command palette in VS Code, which is Control-Shift-P. That opens the command palette, and you can click or search for .NET Open Solution, and then from here, open the solution file from there as well. That's another way of doing it. Okay, so in our game file, now that we're using Nez, we no longer need to inherit from the base game class in MonoGame. Instead, we need to inherit from Nez core. So we're going to remove that, and we're going to add Nez.core. And when we do Nez core, you'll see that there's a few things that we can give it. We can tell it the width and height of our window. We can tell it whether it's in full screen or not. We can set the title of our window with the default content directory. We can also set the hardware mode switch for whether it's exclusive full screen or non-exclusive when we do full screen. We're not going to set any of that up here. Just be aware that you can set that up. We're just going to keep it on default. I'm going to add the using Nez statement up here because we're going to need that in a little bit. But now that we have that set up, we can actually delete everything out of this game1 class except for like the initialize property or the initialize method. And so the reason we do that is, and I'll show you real quick. If I do .NET run now, it errors out. It didn't actually run. So why didn't it run? We didn't get an error. If you're using the C# dev kit extension, you might have the Solution Explorer panel down over here. I didn't like it over here. I moved it to the right, so mine's over here. That's why it's here. So if I do this now as a debug, let's find out why it's actually failing. Let's run. And here we go. Exception occurred. Right here, a graphics device manager is already registered. The graphics device manager cannot be changed once it is set. So the reason this is happening is because Nez, let's stop this and move this window down. When we inherited from Nez core, there's a bunch of stuff in Nez core that gets set up for us. One of those things that gets set up for us is the graphics device manager. So we no longer need to set this up ourselves inside of our game class. So we can delete that out. And along with that, we can delete out the constructor. We're going to keep the initialize method, and we can delete load content. We can delete update. We can delete draw. Nez is going to handle all of that for us. We don't have to set all that up. So inside of our initialize method, in here, we're going to want to create a scene for Nez, since Nez uses the concept of like scenes with entities, and the entities have components. So you're going to want to create a scene to use in Nez. So to do that, just type in scene. We'll call this my first scene equals new, not new scene, scene dot create. And we're going to choose the create with default renderer. That's going to set up a bunch of stuff for us. You can do create and then add your own renderer. If you're going to do that, I would suggest looking at the Nez tutorials to learn how to do that yourself. But for now, just for the simplicity of this video, we're going to create a scene with a default renderer. And we're going to give it a clear color of cornflower blue, good old cornflower blue. We're going to save, and then back in the terminal, I'm going to do a .NET run. And if I do this, what we're hoping to see is our scene with the cornflower blue background. However, we do not get a scene with the cornflower blue background. Instead, we get a scene with the black background. But we can see in the title of our game, it says Nez 60 frames per second, 2.9 megabyte memory usage. So we do know that we're actually hooked into and using Nez now. It just didn't use our scene. So why didn't it use our scene? Well, that's because we didn't tell Nez to use the scene. We just created the scene. So in here, we need to say core.scene equals my first scene. And now we do a .NET run. We'll get our scene with the cornflower blue window running in Nez. So there we go. That's the basic setup for Nez if you're going to use the VS Code. But we can take this a couple of steps further, which I'm going to do in this video, because since we're not using Visual Studio and we're using VS Code, we're also going to need to set up the things to load our content into the game, our textures and sound files and assets and all those things. There's ways of doing this in Visual Studio. That's kind of a little bit easier because you just like right click things and change the properties. We don't have that in VS Code, so we need to set up some of this stuff manually. So let's go through all the steps to do that. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to go into our content folder, and we're actually going to delete the bin folder, the object folder, and the content MGCB file. Just completely remove those out of the content folder, empty that folder out. And then we're going to add a new picture or image file. I'm just going to add my Aristotle PNG file to the content folder. This is just a image I use to test things out with. And so now we want to use this PNG. We want to load this as a sprite in our scene. However, let me delete this bin folder here just to show you. If I do a .NET build and I build my project and I go to bin, you're going to notice that that content folder was not included here. That Aristotle PNG was not copied over. So normally in Visual Studio, what you would do is you would right click on the PNG file, you would go to properties, and in the property panel, you would change the build action to like content, and then tell it to copy to output directory on build, and then would copy it over. However, we don't have, it's not that simple in VS Code. Instead, we need to actually edit our CS_proj file to tell it to copy all of the files from the content folder to the build when we build our project. So let's open up our Nez example CS_proj, and down here at the bottom, just before the closing tag for project, let's add a new item group tag. And inside that, we're going to say none include equals. We're going to tell it our content folder, and then we'll give it an asterisk for a wildcard. So this is saying everything inside the content folder, anything that's inside of that. We want to copy to output directory, and we're going to say preserve newest. And then we'll close that tag off. And now I'm going to delete the bin folder just to make sure there's a clean bin folder there. If I do a .NET build, inside of our bin folder, we now have the content folder with our Aristotle PNG, just like we would expect to have it. So that's cool. That's been set up. But since we're also not using the content MGCB, which means we're not using the MGCB editor, we're not using the MGCB to build content into XMB files, that means we're also not going to need this MonoGame Content Builder task NuGet anymore. So while we're here in the CS_proj, we can go ahead and delete that out. If I can hit the correct buttons on my keyboard instead of the Z key. All right, so we can delete that out. The next thing we're going to want to do, and this is just going to make it really simple for accessing the content instead of having to memorize the paths for where the content is. Nez comes with some T4 templates. If you open up the Nez folder and go to T4 templates, there's one here called content path generator.tt. If we right click and copy that, and then we go to our project folder and paste that in, what this does, if you're not familiar with T4 templates, is it's basically like a code generator. It's going to generate a C# code file for us. And it's basically going to scan the content directory, get all the files in the content directory, and set up a code file for us that has constant strings with the paths to those content files. So we don't have to memorize the paths or hard code type the paths in. We can just reference what this code file is, what's generated from this code file. However, we don't have any way of running a T4 template in VS Code natively. So instead, what we're going to need to do is make sure we're inside of our project folder, the Nez example project. We're going to do .NET tool, let me spell .NET correctly, .NET tool install, and we're going to install the .NET -T4 tool. This is going to allow us to run T4 templates. Once that's installed, we can type .NET T4. We're going to give it the content path generator TT file, and we're going to tell it to output. And you can call this whatever you want. I'm just going to call this content sources.cs. Make sure it ends with .cs though. And that's going to run the T4 generator or the T4 templating engine against the content path generator file. And that outputs this content sources file that we just told it to create. And if we look in here, we can see the only content I have is the errors turtle PNG, but it did create a class for us called content with a constant string with the name of my content file, which was the errors turtle, and it has the path to that file for us. So that's really cool. We don't have to hard code those path files or memorize those path files. Anytime we add new content, we can run this templating and it will spit out this file for us that has those paths. Fantastic. So now that we have the content stuff set up, let's actually set up our scene to show this content file. Let's actually load the content file in and show it. So the first thing we're going to want to do is actually load our texture in. So we're going to do texture 2D, errors turtle texture equals. Now, normally in MonoGame, at this point, you would say content.load texture 2D, and then give it the name of the XMB file. Nez, however, each scene comes with its own content manager. So we can just use the scene's content manager to load the texture in. So I can give it my scene, my first scene, and then say content, and use that, the Nez's content manager. And specifically, since we're loading a texture 2D, and we're going to be loading it from file, we can do the load texture command. And now we can give it that Nez content.errors turtle, which is that content path that was auto-generated for us. So we can tell it to load that texture from that path. Fantastic. So we've loaded our texture in. Now we need to create an entity that's going to go in our scene that we can give a component to render the texture itself. So let's create an entity. Entity errors turtle entity. Can I not spell things correctly tonight? Errors turtle entity equals. We'll do my first scene again, and we'll say create entity, and we just call it errors turtle. So now we have our entity. We need to create a component to attach to the entity that's going to render our texture 2D. So we'll say errors turtle entity dot add component, and the component we're going to add is a sprite renderer. So we'll do sprite renderer, and when we do that, that's actually going to return back the sprite renderer that gets created. So the sprite renderer equals, there we go. And then we can tell the renderer itself to set the texture to our errors turtle texture. And there we have it. We have created a scene. In this scene, we have created an entity called errors turtle. On this entity, we have attached a component or created an component and added to it called a sprite renderer, and we've called it renderer. And then in the renderer itself, we've told it to set the texture to be errors turtle. And in the Nez core scene, we've told it that the scene we're going to be using is the my first scene. So now if we .NET run, there we go. It's drawing our errors turtle. Obviously it's drawing it in the wrong, well, it's actually not drawing it in the wrong place. It's drawing it exactly where it's supposed to draw it. By default, it defaults to the entity position is at 0, 0. So that's where it drew it. If you wanted to change the entity position, In here where we created the entity, we can just do Aristotle entity.transform .position equals new vector 2, and we'll just say 100 100. Save .net run, and now the image will not be stuck in the corner. It's moved over some, not very much, but it's moved over. But yeah, you can position your entity like that. So cool. Yeah, this is how you'll set up Nez if you're using VS Code. So just to go over some of this very quickly from a high level perspective, when using Nez with VS Code, you will first need to create a MonoGame project like you normally would in VS Code. Once you've created the project, you'll need to download the Nez source code, which we've done here. Once you've got the source code downloaded, you'll need to add a project reference. If you're using MonoGame, you're going to need to add a project reference to the Nez portable Nez MG38CS proj. You're going to need to add a reference to that in your game project. That's going to get you set up at a base with Nez being referenced and usable. Then once you do that, you'll go through all the normal setup stuff that you would with Nez to get your game running with Nez, which you can find in the Nez tutorials and wikis and everything, which I've also gone over here in this video if you want to rewind and rewatch. So cool. What was the Reddit user's name again? I'm so sorry, I forgot your name already. Elafito. There you go. Is it possible to make Nez work on VS Code? Yes, it is possible. And with that, I'm going to sign off. I hope you all have a wonderful day or night, whatever it is where you are. And until the next video, have a good one.